Every mountain looks mapped, but the Cherokee tracked one creature they refused to name. Those hunters cataloged hundreds of species across the Smokies with flawless precision centuries before modern biology caught up. Yet one massive shape moving through the deep Appalachian ridges broke every rule they had built. It carried a flat face with no visible ears and vanished without leaving a single bone behind in the soil. Western taxonomy demands dead specimens pinned to a board. Indigenous naturalists operated differently. They sorted the living forest by behavior, sound, and seasonal rhythm. A whirligig beetle wasn't just an aquatic insect to them. They called it doyunisi, translating directly to the beaver's grandchild. That title emerged from watching the insect spin in circles on the water, mapping its relationship to the environment rather than just its physical form. This system organized the woods perfectly. Broad groups came first, separating the bird tribe from four-footed mammals and things that crawl from things that fly. Inside those groups, color and action dictated survival. The copperhead wasn't just a snake. It was named explicitly for the visual cue on its skull, allowing a hunter to identify it instantly in terrible light when the stakes were absolute. Misidentifying that reptile even once cost a man everything. The name carried the warning inside it. Modern ecologists attempt to replicate that exact kind of relational tracking today. But for generations, official textbooks pushed those records aside as mere folklore. That filter stripped away detailed field knowledge and replaced it with a false sense of superiority. How much was actually lost? Enough to create a blind spot that still stretches across the region. DNA sequencing eventually forced a brutal reckoning. For decades, biologists looked at tiny shell insects in the leaf litter and lazily labeled them all as one species, called Dasycerus carolinensis. Genetics recently shattered that assumption. The lab results split that single beetle into 9 distinct species that diverged 11 million years ago. Cherokee observers had already grouped those insects separately based on how they moved and where they lived. They possessed that exact phylogeographic map without ever touching a microscope. Fence lizards carry that same hidden precision. Indigenous watchers tied the spring emergence of those reptiles directly to rain patterns. Modern climate models now measure those exact environmental cues, confirming what the original inhabitants knew purely through generational repetition. A small brown moth fluttered through the local timber for centuries without a formal Latin title. It remained entirely absent from the official catalog until 2014. Researchers finally described it and named it Cherokee atakulakula. The insect did not materialize out of thin air that year. It had always been flying through those dark hollows. The delay happened because the dominant scientific framework refused to look where the older system was already pointing. That refusal isolated countless Appalachian lineages. Small salamanders are still actively hiding in wet seeps today. Blind spiders dominate the vast subterranean cave networks. The landscape itself fractures populations, separating ancient lines across damp folds and cold elevations. Then the flawless framework hits a brick wall. A culture that noticed the exact digging sound of a mole cricket did not overlook large mammals crossing their hunting grounds. Over 300 species match perfectly between James Mooney's 19th century ethnological notes and the bones pulled from regional archaeological sites. Deer, pigs, and turkeys fill the dirt trenches at Site 31C781, where over 4,700 bones were precisely counted. The system tracked wolves moving in coordinated packs, a detail modern biology confirms as standard pack predation. They noticed how otters slipped through the river edges at dawn. Every known predator had a strict category, a known habitat, and a predictable rhythm. Yet one specific account recorded by Mooney defies every known biological law in the Southeast. A witness stood in clear daylight and watched a shaggy, off-white beast moving on 4 legs. The observer instantly ruled out a black bear. That dismissal matters intensely. Anyone raised in the southern timber defaults to a bear when a dark shape moves low in the brush. This observer refused the easy answer. The creature weighed around 400 pounds, carrying its whole belly a full 3 feet off the dirt. It possessed long legs that suggested an unnatural speed entirely foreign to a bear's compact, heavy stride. But the head breaks the reality of the sighting. The thing had a flat muzzle and no visible ears. Every recognized mammal in the eastern woodlands shows ears at a distance. A completely smooth skull indicates an anatomy that does not belong on that continent. Cherokee hunters never trapped it. They avoided it. That avoidance creates a structural paradox. A culture dealing with harsh winters hunted everything they could process. If the beast consisted of standard flesh and blood, somebody would have shot it, skinned it, and utilized the hide. Nobody ever did. The absence of physical proof forces the story into a different lane. Outsiders love to blur the lines, assuming indigenous lore confused scary shadows with undiscovered monsters. The actual tradition maintained a brutal separation between myth and meat. A trout swimming in the cold stream was an animal to be eaten. The massive horned serpent called the Uktena belonged strictly to the realm of nightmare. They never mixed the two. When the folklore wanted to build a warning, it deliberately warped the anatomy. The Wampus cat stalks through local legends with 6 functional legs. 4 limbs run, while 2 limbs fight. That impossible body plan is not a botched description of a mountain lion slipping through the rhododendrons. It serves as a flashing red light signaling a curse or a taboo. The Cherokee death cat operates on the exact same psychological frequency. Stories describe a 5 to 7 foot feline that smells heavily of skunk and occasionally runs on 2 legs. Real panthers lunge upward, but their spines cannot sustain bipedal running. A massive cat carrying a skunk odor is a patchwork terror designed to enforce boundaries, not a cryptic taxon waiting for a trail camera. The little people, or Yonwi Sunsti, fit the same mold. They represent humanoid cave dwellers carrying ancient power, not a forgotten lineage of dwarf primates the biology departments somehow overlooked. The impossible traits remain impossible on purpose. Frontier Inc. provides the hardest evidence against the monster theory. European traders pouring across the trans-Appalachian backcountry during the 17th and 18th centuries cared intensely about survival and commerce. John Smith and the Virginia colonists kept rigorous inventories of what the land produced and what threats it harbored. Those men documented black bears ruining their camps. They recorded wolf packs decimating their livestock. They noted cougars turning the night watch into a desperate fight. Their pages overflow with deer, bison, and turkeys because those creatures drove the massive deerskin economy. Even the much earlier De Soto expedition in 1540 left records centered purely on villages, disease, and the known realities of the country. Not a single journal entry from that entire era describes a 6-legged feline or an earless pale giant attacking a settlement. A man living on the raw edge of the woods does not casually ignore a massive unknown predator destroying his calves. The silence inside those historical diaries is deafening. It completely shatters the illusion that settlers and indigenous hunters were staring at the exact same hidden cryptid. The famous beasts only gained traction much later, when oral folklore crashed violently into the printing press. The Wampus cat practically explodes into the historical record through early 20th century newspapers. Reporters in 1918 and throughout the 1920s and 1930s typed up sensational accounts of livestock massacres in North Carolina and Georgia, cementing the creature in the public mind. Locals discovered their livestock torn apart and described sounds at night as human screams rather than animal roars. That creates a delay of over a century between the hard frontier reality and the printed legend. Bounties were quickly offered because money brings certainty. If something real exists, someone always collects the cash, but no one ever did, not once, despite relentless trying. The death cat's paper trail hits the identical dead end, tracing back to 19th century rumors rather than colonial contact. Stories migrate from ridge to ridge, gathering claws, weight, and human faces. With every retelling, biology narrows under intense observation, but a legend only deepens and stretches when a community endlessly shares it. Yet people still run into something they absolutely cannot explain. Modern incident reports log encounters that sound uncomfortably like the oldest warnings. Fishermen and off-duty hikers walk the familiar trails right now and suddenly spot a massive shaggy shape dropping to all fours. The witness freezes. The shape vanishes. Traps set by professionals turn up totally empty. Wildlife cameras capture nothing but deer and swaying branches. Footprints sink deep into the mud and then mysteriously cease to exist, as if the animal achieved flight or completely altered its physical density. A biological entity must leave a corpse eventually. No hunter has ever dragged a 400-pound earless carcass into a truck bed. So the human mind tries to force a rational exit strategy. One theory leans hard on rarity. The logic assumes a localized population barely clinging to survival in the deepest, most inaccessible Spruce Fir Islands, remaining strictly nocturnal to completely avoid human intersection. Extinct birds and isolated plants occasionally reappear under those exact conditions. The opposing theory blames the human brain itself. The psychological engine despises a vacuum, readily converting a strange shadow or a weirdly moving bear into a mythical beast just to resolve the rising panic. But the locations of these sightings stubbornly refuse to scatter randomly. The incidents cluster heavily around specific ridgelines and remote hollows, tying the deep fear to permanent geographical coordinates. Belief changes constantly, but the physical ground remains identical. The fact that advanced surveillance tools utterly fail to resolve the mystery only sharpens the endless frustration. High-definition trail feeds simply document the ongoing absence more cleanly. The debate endlessly loops between a hidden physical presence or a powerful shared illusion. This tension defines the entire Appalachian region. The deep woods operate as a brutal filter, deciding exactly what gets witnessed in the daylight and what slips away in the freezing rain. The subterranean water networks are continually carving through the limestone today. The isolated cave systems are continually harboring undiscovered biological species right now. Every missing answer exerts an invisible pressure on the communities that live on the edge of the timber. The Cherokee naming system left a deliberate blank spot because the relationship with that specific creature never stabilized into something predictable. A weak taxonomy guesses to fill the void. A disciplined framework leaves room for the unknown. The gap itself acts as evidence of an elusiveness that absolutely defies modern categorization, and that unrecorded space refuses to close safely into the distant past. A man can drive a paved mountain road for 30 years and never fully understand what lies 50 yards off the asphalt beneath a wet ledge at midnight. The surface of the terrain looks completely mapped, categorized, and subdued by progress. The underlying reality remains stubbornly unmeasured. Generations of eyes have watched those deep hollows, and while they never agreed on the exact shape shifting in the shadows, they all stopped dead in their tracks the exact same way. If absolutely nothing physical has ever been cornered, tracked down, or violently captured in those woods, why hasn't the pattern of encounters finally stopped?